All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Early. I'm a recovering alcoholic drug addict. And Keith, thanks for the introduction. If my wife were here, she would be screaming out, "That is not good for his humility," the things that you have to say. But I appreciate you. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. And it's the 12th step. And the 12th step says, having had a spiritual awakening. As the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And I was taught early on when I finally decided that I really wanted to do something in this program. I was taught early on that what I need to do is I need to talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And briefly, what it was like. I was 11 years old. I was kicked out of Boy Scouts for sneaking brandy into Anderson Scout Camp on the St. Croix River outside of the western edge of Wisconsin. When I was 12 years old, I stole a case of beer from the Moose Lodge that was attached to my dad's plumbing and heating business. And I got highly intoxicated that night on the first night of fishing and found out that alcohol, Pabst Blue Ribbon specifically, could do for me what I couldn't do for myself. I found a total relief, and my insecurities, my fear, everything had disappeared that night in that euphoric evening, and I chased it. I chased it for a good number of years. When I was in high school, I drank as much as I could, as often as I could. I was kicked off of basketball teams, kicked out of football. Uh, I flunked my college entrance test because I was out till 5 o'clock in the morning and got home about 5 o'clock in the morning, slept for about an hour, and then went to the University of Wisconsin River Falls to take the ACT test and slept through most of it. And the guy next to me woke me up because it was a timed thing. I flunked it, so I wasn't allowed to enter college. But the dean or the chancellor of the university was our neighbor, my dad's neighbor. So he allowed me to enter in scholastic probation. And when you go into college on scholastic probation, then you register after everybody else who did it properly was able to register. And since that was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I ended up thinking it would be okay for me to go have a few beers. And I ended up coming to the University of Wisconsin River Falls to register for school, highly intoxicated, and I was kicked out of the university during registration, which I think it's still a record at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. Anyhow, uh, I got lots of speeding tickets, lots of accidents. I bought a brand new 1969 Mustang, and I owned it for 2 weeks and totaled it. And the kid that was with me broke his neck. I was able to walk away. By the way, the kid that was with me that broke his neck was fine, and he passed away 2 years ago with 40 some years of sobriety, which was pretty cool, because he ended up following me into the program. Uh, I ended up in jail a number of times, drunk and disorderly. I was AWOL from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and was picked up and taken to what they call Leavenworth Penitentiary. And actually, it was just the jail attached to Leavenworth, but they thought they'd scare me by saying Leavenworth Penitentiary. I picked a fight with an MP one night and got thrown in jail again. I used to steal from my father's business, early plumbing and heating. I uh, I found myself borrowing $20 on Wednesday because I was broke and paid back $30 on Friday when I got paid. A loss of friends, loss of family, and then the ultimate decision that ended up ending my drinking and drugging career was uh, this is what happened. All right. On September 6th, 1969, I was sitting in a bar in North Hudson, Wisconsin, with the two people that I had with me that day left because they couldn't count on me. So I was sitting at the bar with two close personal friends that I'd met that night, and opened up my wallet to buy another round, and I only had $10 left. And I started complaining to them that, I was broke. And the reason I was broke, it came to me. It had nothing to do with my spending or my insanity, but the reason I was broke was my father didn't pay me enough. I worked for him, and that's why I was broke. And I complained about that. And finally, this gentleman said, "Well, don't tell me, tell your boss." So I went to the phone at 12:30 in the morning. I called my father and told him where he could shove his job. And my dad said, "This really isn't the time or the place to talk about it. Come on home and we'll talk about it." And I told him where he could shove his home. And he said, "Suit yourself," and he hung up. Now, my father sobered up when I was 7 years old in 1956, and he was sentenced to Alcoholics Anonymous after he ran the only stoplight in Hudson, Wisconsin, and smashed in the only squad car Hudson had. So he was sentenced to AA, and he was sober that night. I found myself sitting in the parking lot, wondering, now what in God's name am I going to do? I no longer had a job. I no longer had a home to live in, because the home I was living in was my father's. I was in debt up to my eyeballs, and I did what I thought I needed to do. I went to his sponsor's house, and his sponsor had me sleep it off after talking about having to stop drinking. And he set up a meeting. So we met with my father that afternoon, the next afternoon. And I thought to myself, when I woke up out of the stupor, I thought, what in God's name have I done? If I do this, they're going to make me quit drinking, and they're probably going to make me go to treatment. And we met with my dad, and his sponsor said, you need to go to treatment. And I said, well, I'll go to AA. And he said, you need to go to treatment. And I said, I'll go to lots of AA. And my father spoke up and he said, you need to go to treatment. And I wasn't in any place to play let's make a deal. So I went to treatment, and that was September 7th, 1969. And by the grace of God, Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had to drink or drug since that time. Now the path to my recovery wasn't all that easy. I went to treatment. It was a 21-day program. I successfully completed in 7 weeks. And I was diagnosed alcohol and drug dependent, and through the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and the psychologist, he diagnosed me as a character disorder. When I completed treatment, I started going to AA because it was mandated that I go to AA based on the deal that I made. But I didn't like Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't like the big book. I didn't like the stupid sayings on the wall. Easy does it. Think, think, think. I didn't like those. I didn't like the big book. I didn't like God. I didn't like the people in AA. But I had no choice. And I sat there in the meetings smiling as people were talking, and I'm nodding my head in the affirmative, but in my head, I'm saying, you're all nuts. You don't have a clue. I'm going to take care of this. I'm in charge. All right. And, I just need to get the heat off me for a period of time, and everything's going to be fine. I'll take care of this. I was 9 months sober, and I had my first 12-step call. All right. I was at the New Richmond Alano Club, and the phone rang. I answered it, and this woman on the other end said, "Who is this?" And I said, "It's Mike Early." And she said, "Oh, thank God, you're who I was looking for. Roy is drunk and he wants to get sober. He wants to come back to AA. Can you make a 12-step call?" I said, "Sure. Yeah." So I was going to show my sponsor how this thing was done. So I picked my sponsor up. We drove to this house. And when I walked in the front door, Roy was sitting in a rocking chair with a 12-pack on his side and a shotgun across his lap. And I sat down there, and I gave probably the greatest speech in the history of 12-step calls, telling this individual exactly what he needed to do and how he needed to do it. And after about 15 or 20 minutes, he said, "Well, I've heard enough of this crap." And he lifted the shotgun, grabbed a beer, and said, "You can get out of here now." And we left. And my sponsor we got in the car and my sponsor said, what do you think what went wrong there? And I said, I don't know. He said, you don't have what he wants. You know, and the speech you gave isn't a speech that anyone would really want. And so I eventually fired that sponsor because he was an idiot in my head, in my mind. Again, I was going to do and figure this out on myself. I I was going to take care of it. I was searching for a loophole. I was searching for a loophole because I didn't want to stay sober. I wanted that glow that I found in the beginning. And you take the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and on page 23, it says that I got to find on page 23, it says there is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will still beat the game, but they often suspect they won't. And then on page 30, it says it's the great obsession of every abnormal drinker that someday they'll be able to drink normally. And that's what I was looking for. I wanted to be a normal drinker. I wanted to be able to handle this on my own. And believe it or not, I entered counselor training program 2.5 years sober because I still thought if I go to counselor training, I can figure this thing out. I could figure this thing out. And I got into counselor training, and the supervisor said to me one day, you need to drop out of this training program and never work in this field because you don't have a clue. And he was right, because I was a raving lunatic, still trying to control the world. My sister came up to me around the same time and said, you used to be a drunken, drugged up a-hole. Now you're just an a-hole. All right. And about the same time, I heard this speaker, and the speaker was talking about how he needed to fix himself. And he was talking to his sponsor, and the sponsor finally looked at him and he said, kid, the thing that got you here, the thing that's going to ruin you, and the thing that keeps you from getting everything you want is this one thing. As long as you'll never know. And until you begin to do the things we tell you to do the way we tell you to do them, and do the things we tell you not to do the way we tell you not to do them, then you'll never know. But when you begin to do this and you begin to know that you don't know, then you'll begin to know. And he said, his sponsor he looked at his sponsor and he looked at the sponsor and said, hell, you're crazy. And the sponsor said, I know. But I heard that talk, and for some reason, you talk about the insanity of what's going on in individuals' head. I looked at the sponsor. I listened to that meeting. I bought the tape. I played it over and over until I could recite that. And what I learned at that particular moment was that my recovery was none of my business. My recovery was none of my business. My recovery was your business. My recovery was my higher power's business. And I went to my sponsor, who was my second sponsor, and I said, I got to do something different because I was now bankrupt emotionally. And he opened up the big book to page 47, and it says, do you now believe, are you willing to believe there's a power greater than yourself? And I said, yes. And he said, you're not it. And I said, yes. So we sat down, and he said, you're struggling with this whole higher power thing, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, I want you to read out of the 24-hour day book. And I'm going to read this to you because the first thing he had me read was on March 9th in the 24-hour day book. It says, but since our faith is apt to be weak, we have to we have to strengthen and build up this faith. We do this in several ways. One way is by going to meetings and listening to others tell how they have found all the strength they need to overcome drink. And my sponsor said that what you need to do is you need to start listening to people. And he said, as I heard many people say back in the day, you need to take the cotton from your ears and shove it in your mouth and listen. Listen to what people have to say. And I began to do that. And And when I began to do that, I began to like what I heard, you know, suddenly taking the cotton out of my ears and listening and starting to try some of the things that these people were saying. All of a sudden, it made some sense to me. When I heard we have a daily reprieve based upon fit spiritual condition, you know, that's what I had to grasp. Now, I'm going to refer you to December 26th daily reflections, where it said, after I found AA and stopped drinking, it took a while before I understood why the first step contained two parts: my powerlessness over alcohol and my life's unmanageability. The thousands of dollars in the hole I was, the car crashes, the losing my job, losing my home, losing my friends. That was all. A lot of stuff happened when I was not drinking, so that was part of the unmanageability, the character defects, part of my unmanageability. You know, I believed in the same way I believed that it took a long time in order to be in tune with the 12 steps. It was enough for me to carry this message to alcoholics. Well, you heard what happened when I carried the message to Roy. He lifted the shotgun and kicked me out, right? I was forgetting that there were a total of 12 steps, and that I was also forgetting that the 12th step had more than one part. Eventually, I learned that it was necessary for me to practice these principles in all areas of my life. In order to work the steps thoroughly, I was not only to stay sober, but I had to help others to achieve sobriety. It began to transform me into a program of daily living. When I began to share my experience, strength, and hope, when I began to share what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now, that's when things started to turn around for me. My sponsor had me take the big book and read the doctor's opinion. And I started reading it to myself, and he said, no, 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 read it out loud. So I read it out loud. You know, men and women drink essentially because they like the effects produced by alcohol. And, you know, they're restless, irritable, and discontent until the next few drinks that will give them a sense of comfort, ease and comfort. And I read that out loud to him. And he said, what does that mean? And after 5 times of reading it out loud and saying, I don't know what the hell, what are you getting at? I finally said, I drink because I'm an alcoholic. And before I pick up the drink, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. That's where he helped me connect to the first step. And then he had me go on to read the part of the psychic change, that I had to change everything up here and here, in my head and in my heart. I had to change that. And I began to change that because I did not want to live the way I was living any longer. And when all of a sudden that stuff came together, me surrendering to the fact that my life was unmanageable, I need to change what's up here and what's in my heart. That's when I was able to start helping other people carry the message. It's a daily reprieve based on fit spiritual condition. Now I'm going to say this, and then I'll just shut up. But it says in the big book, we claim spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. You know, I was sober 25 years. All right. And I was sitting at an AA meeting in Manhattan, the Mustard Seed Group on 38th and Lexington. Yeah. I know, you know. And I'd had a rough couple of weeks, really a rough couple of weeks. And I'm sitting there and I was angry, resentful, restless, irritable, and discontented, right? And I wasn't listening to anything anybody had to say. But in the mustard seed, it was the newcomers group. Only people with 30 days and less could speak. And then some of us other people that have more time could speak. So they went through the thing. And I started talking about some of the BS that I was going through, and they could see how angry I was. And this one gentleman who had maybe 5 minutes sobriety said to me, it might be a good thing for you to read that sign behind you on the wall. And I turned and I looked, and it said, it is a spiritual axiom that no matter when we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with us. And it took me back. It took me back to, okay, wait a minute. I'm not in fit spiritual condition. I wasn't able to carry the message to anybody. I wasn't able to help anybody understand how my life had become much better by living this program. I did for a number of years, and then all of a sudden I got sidetracked again. My daily prayer and meditation wasn't daily any longer. That fit spiritual condition based on a daily reprieve, it wasn't there. It wasn't there. So I had to get back to the daily prayer and meditation, and I did a really good job with that for a number more years. And then I'm walking around and people are saying, geez, Early, you're doing a great job. You're really doing a great job. And I'm saying, yeah, I am. And I forgot about the fact that it's not about me. It's about you all. And it's about my higher power. And it's about the fit spiritual condition. And then my daily prayer and meditation sloughed off again. It's something that I've got to practice on a daily basis. And if I don't, I'm going to find myself like I did some years sober, and I found myself living alone because I became that restless, irritable, discontent SOB, as my sister used to say. The 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's my sponsor. All of the steps. If you're not practicing all of the steps and not applying all of those steps, you're not going to be able to carry the message and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. Hopefully you got something out of this. If not, tough. I did. So I'll turn it back over to Keith.
Actually, Mike, as always, thank you so much. And, every day we learn something. Every day we get connected. We stay in recovery. And as we continue to work these steps, we have a chance to spread them, help the next suffering person and help them get into the rooms. Christine, at this point, I'm going to let Christine, because Christine's better at sort of running the show. But Mike, thank you again. And if you stick around, people might ask you questions about how you work a 12-step, or they might have some comments.